All right, so a word about reading the novel. First, definition. This is a novel as opposed to a textbook. What's a novel? A work of what? Fiction, meaning not true. These events never happened as far as the author knows, okay? Now you may have historical fiction that's based on a real event, but the author is not trying to give you a completely accurate impression or interpretation of what happened. So a novel is a work of fiction. It's not true. It's a storybook, okay? Textbook is not supposed to be a work of fiction. However, there's a lot of stuff that's not accurate in a textbook because historians are not perfect either, or sociologists or psychologists or whatever. They're telling you what they think is true, but in 20 years, there will be several things in that textbook that are exposed as not being exactly true or not a fair interpretation, but it's supposed to be true. It is non-fiction. I say this because students are always saying, in the novel, Land of Hope, right? No, you're demonstrating something there that is disturbing to your professor. You don't know the definition of the word novel, see. In the textbook, My Antonia, it's technically a textbook, but it's not a textbook, okay? It's a novel. In the novel, My Antonia. So, especially in terms of academics, and that's what you're here for, the words matter. The words are clues as well as facts, okay? They also indicate where you're at in terms of your education. You use them well, or if you don't, see? And then you're being assessed on that, whether the professor is actually giving you a grade or not. There's the key, or not, see? You're creating an impression, and especially in a small class, which is not a small class, right? So, but in a small class, especially in your majors, even when you're not being graded, you're always being graded, okay? Yeah. All right, so when you have a quiz like today from the novel, you should say yes, because relatively speaking, it's a lot easier than the text quizzes. All I want to see as far as the novel is concerned is that you're doing the reading. So I'm picking out stuff that's really significant and actually quite memorable in the novel. Snakes! Right? Snakes! There's so many movies with Home Alone, there's the snakes scene, right? And then, of course, in Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom, there's this, oh, I hate snakes. Yeah, I actually look away when I see snakes on television because they're going to show up in my dreams at night if I look too carefully. And I do not like to have snakes in my bed at night, in my dreams. So, memorable, right? That's why I put that in there. Major characters and major plot turns, pay attention. If you're paying attention and you're reading while you're awake, you should get the quiz questions from the novel. The last thing you want to do is say to yourself, well, the novel's not that big a deal. I won't bother to read the novel because you're going to blow the quiz questions, and those are the easy quiz questions. See? So I suspect that for most of you, reading the novel is going to be something that you get into at some point, and you'll actually enjoy it. I know, you don't have to admit it, okay? So in order to help you understand why I've assigned the novel, I've given you that little handout, My Antonia. So it's about the book. It's about the why you should care, what's significant about the book, that it's still being assigned, virtually a century later, in a lot of classes, not just mine, not just this one. A lot of lit classes and so forth. But this is an historical novel, so it fits. And then a little bit about the author. Again, academics, your professors, most of them are authors, and so they care about the authors. They always refer, 99% of them, to a text by the last name of the author, don't they? So this is Cather, the textbook by Maclay, see. All right, so this seminar lasts about a half an hour or so, and then you guys will go. Is about how to read the text, how to read a piece of nonfiction textbook. How to read at the college level. When I want to insult somebody, I always say, I'm going to teach you how to read. That started a long time ago, right? No, I'm not teaching you how to read, although those some of the similar elements, but I'm teaching you how to read at the college level. And If you were like me, and I was an A student in college, I did not read at the college level in terms of strategy. I read in terms of speed. I read in terms of retention. I read in terms of vocabulary at a very high level. But in terms of strategy, I didn't have it. What I did in college was read everything twice or more. Okay? That's what I did. Not many of you are willing to do that. Understandable. All the more you need a strategy. You need to take full advantage of the time you are reading to maximum effect. That's what I'm going to teach you here today. Okay? The strategy for doing the reading. And the absolute first thing you have to train yourself to do is not start reading until you've thoroughly checked out and memorized what? The title of the book, Land of Hope. You know how many texts on American history there are? Land of Freedom, Land of Equality, Unfinished Business. All these things tell you something about the interpretation that the author is seeking to get across to you. Unfinished Business is a text in American history. The author is going to tell you what was wrong with America from page 1 to page 300. Unfinished business. Failure, 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 failure. Sound like fun to read? No. Are all the failures probably true? Yes, probably. But he's leaving out all the successes as well, see. Or not really interested in those. So it's a biased interpretation. Land of Hope. You're thinking about then all those stories or moments in history that demonstrate, you see, that these people are involved in a search for a better life. Hope, see, something better. What supports that thesis? Where's that not true, you see? So you keep that in the back of your mind as you read the book. This guy thinks that all of American history really should be defined as a search for hope, right? It's optimistic. We think we can find that, right? As opposed to pessimistic, unfinished business. So you have an attitude that you're seeing there. Perhaps even a bias that you should be aware of. Okay? And then, even more importantly, the titles of the chapters. Because that's what the chapter you're reading is setting out to prove. There is almost always a thesis in a chapter title. Becoming a world empire. Right? Well, think about it for a moment. Something suggests we were not a world empire. Here we're going to become one. We achieved that status. How did we do that? Who led us? How? Who? See? So you're looking for that in that chapter. You now have something to look for. When you find it, that's what you highlight. Right? As opposed to my methodology, when I was a student, I just started reading. And then I hoped that the right stuff, the stuff that was going to be on the test, would stick to my gray cells. And I would read it over again because I knew that if I did that, then more stuff would stick to my gray cells. I'd have a better chance of regurgitating whatever it was I was supposed to have caught. I didn't develop a strategy that would help me until grad school. And so I went from a shotgun approach, hoping everything hits, to more of a 30-06 approach. Bang, bang, bang. Now I've got 6 things in the chapter that I know, but I also know they're important. And so now my ability to anticipate a test question or a quiz question just skyrocketed. See? Now this depends on, and this is human life, and so there are always exceptions, okay? This depends on you not having the professor that is looking for the minor detail that does not matter just because she wants to trip you up. I said she. Could be a he. Who cares? When you figure out that that's the professor you got, and that's not normal, then you can't do this, okay? You've got to try to adapt. Guess what? How successful you are in college and how successful you are in your job depends on your ability to adapt. Oh, there's a curveball. I have to be able to hit the curveball. Ask Major League Baseball players. I know there's some guys here in this class that are on the baseball team. Raise your hand if you're on the baseball team. You have to hit the curveball, right? Yeah. You may not hit it as well as the fastball, but you have to hit it or you won't be playing Division III baseball. See? You certainly aren't getting to the major leagues, and some of our guys have gone on to major league careers. See? So you got to be aware of the professor that throws you a curveball, and you got to be able to hit that at least a high percentage of the time. You got to adapt. No use saying to yourself, oh gosh, I don't like this guy. He's different. Welcome to life. You got to deal with the different. What happens if you're a manager and your new job, the one you've trained for 4 or 5 years to get, is the different guy? You got to be able to adapt. Okay. So let's go through the chapter, Becoming a World Power. We're remembering the title. We are looking for how did we become a world power and who led us there? See? Because remember on your test, this is not unusual, we're going to put up important people to match to important events, okay? That's the way the test starts. 12 people, important people you probably already heard of. So you need to answer the who question. And then you will recognize the fact that in your strategy, that in a well-written textbook, a well-written chapter, the first page or so is crucial. And what is the other crucial page? The last page, okay? The first page, a good author is going to set up what they're going to do. First page, page and a half, 2 pages. So you are 100% engaged on page 1 and 2. And then when you get to that last page, you're 100% engaged. And what you're hoping to see on the last page is the conclusion, that is the summary of what you've read. And if that's what you see, then you know and that makes sense to you, you know you've gotten most of that chapter. If you read that last page and it doesn't seem to make any sense to you, you missed it. See? So what I do is I highlight. I use a pen because I don't care how much the books cost. Okay? And you can use a pencil or you can use a little Post-it notes. And you are not going to put so many Post-it notes in here that becomes burdensome. All right? Now, I know that a lot of you already have a system for doing this. I'm not telling you to change it. But what I am suggesting is if you highlight accurately in some way, you can go back and review those highlights in 10 minutes. And so that's what I would do. I'd come to class if I could 10 minutes early. I'd sit down and I'd review my highlights right there. And then you can do the same thing for each of the 3 or 4 chapters or whatever it is before the test. 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. Note guides, by the way, 2 sides, right? How long does it take you to read 2 sides of a note guide? 5 minutes? Yeah. So there you go. You can review for a test in an hour pretty thoroughly. Okay. So now we start reading on that first page. We're paying attention. We want to see if there's a thesis or an argument that's going to be developed all the way through. But we also have to be patient. But we are looking for something here as opposed to just reading. And that is the big difference. Okay? The mind is up and active and engaged. And the incredible thing about that is that when you're thinking, as you're reading, as you go through, a lot of stuff that you don't care about is going to stick, at least for a few days. Right? As opposed to, oh gosh, I hope everything sticks attitude. See? Because you're looking for something. You're engaged. You're like a detective looking for clues. And again, it's not just for history. Not at all. So words prop up then, or come up then, and then you don't know the meaning of the word. Paragraph 1, respite. What is a respite? I don't want you to raise your hands, but a lot of you read that word and you had no idea what it was, and you didn't stop to look it up. You can't do that. Especially not when you got that cell phone right next to you. You know, back in the dark ages, when I was your age, if I read a word that I did not know the answer to, I had to get out of my chair, unless I was thinking ahead, which I usually wasn't. And I had to walk all the way across the apartment room. And I had to pick up a huge dictionary book that weighed 40 pounds. And I had to leaf my way through to the right word. unabridged dictionary. I mean, this is enormously difficult. And yet I did it. Yeah. You have to. That's part of the college education. You guys just phone, Google, there's the word, right? So nobody's going to give you any slack for this. Yeah. Because life was so much more difficult in the Dark Ages. Respite. We have not had a great deal to say about American foreign policy to this point. So this is going to be about foreign policy, clearly. Becoming a world power, foreign policy. Okay. So now I'm not going to worry so much about domestic policy. That's the interior part of the economy or the country. Second paragraph, definition. That, of course, didn't mean that the nation was ever completely cut off from the larger world. The familiar term isolationism, do you know what that word means? This time, there's a huge clue here because you did what? You put it in italics. That tells you right there, this is a word he wants you to know. Some authors will use bold. But this one's italics. So you got to know what isolationism is. You might pick it up from the context. You might already know. But if you don't, you know what to do. It's going to make a whole lot more sense if you know what the words mean. And then he says, no country as energetic as the United States was in the spread of commerce and trade and the relentless search for new markets for its manufactured goods and agricultural commodities could ever be completely isolated. So if we know that isolationism means that we're just paying attention to our own business and we have minimal foreign contact and minimal concern to have foreign contact, we like it that way, then you can understand that he's saying that no country is ever completely isolationistic. And look at this, through this paragraph. No country, and then down again. No country whose intellectual and high cultural life remains so closely attentive to, blah, 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 blah. And then look again. No country, no country. He's countering the isolationism argument, isn't he? Sure he is. He's saying, I don't like that interpretation. And down at the end, he's going to give you a middle-of-the-road interpretation. Now, we're not fully engaged in foreign policy like we are today. We're not the leader of the free world like we are today, but we are engaged. Okay, so what he says here is that in the last sentence, in that sense, it was indeed an interlude of relative apartness. All right, so not isolationism, not fully engaged, but in the middle, relative apartness. That's what he thinks is the best way to define American foreign policy at this time. A legitimate test question, quiz question. What is Maclay's interpretation of America's position in the world at this time, as found on page 1? See? But I very much doubt that many of you could have answered that question. But it's a completely fair question. We just had to analyze our way through it. I want you to be able to do that. See? That's the kind of thing that's very memorable, though, isn't it? Sure it is. You don't have to sit there for an hour and try to memorize that. You got it. Page 2. So we're reading along, and we get to that name, George Washington. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of George Washington. Okay. I'd be shocked if it wasn't unanimous. So you know something. This guy is what? Important. All right, I'm paying attention again. See? I know George Washington. I know he's important. So that's what we want to do. We want to pay attention, especially when we think it's important. There's a clue. It's George Washington. We heard of this guy. Much revered farewell address. I probably even heard of the farewell address. So why is this important? Why is he mentioned? Particularly by its insistence that the United States avoid contracting any permanent alliances or other enduring entanglements in the affairs of other countries, particularly not in the quarrelsome countries of Western Europe, a certain disposition toward apartness seemed to be part of the American character and the American mission. So he's using Washington in the farewell to reinforce his idea of relative apartness. Okay? Okay, I get it. So if I was a little bit confused about whether I had actually understood it. Now I got Washington as the example of relative apartness here, proving his point with George Washington. Okay, I get it. Words matter. Next paragraph. Perhaps the most memorable statement of that view was offered by James Monroe's brilliant Secretary of State and future President, John Quincy Adams. Okay, you're looking for the author to tell you what's important. And you're reading for those words, right? The most memorable statement of that view. What view? Relative apartness, right? Again, here is a very logical quiz or test question because the author has told you this was important. See? That's what you highlight. And you're building this interpretation of relative apartness all the way through. Now, this is going to take a little bit longer than it would if you just read right through without thinking about it, just hoping to memorize stuff. Okay? But you're going to get so much more out of it, and you're not going to have to go back and read the whole thing again, see, if you're inclined to do that. So the words matter. The most memorable statement, we can say this 1,000 different ways, but he is grading why this is important. You see, that's the greatest moment in American history was, the most significant moment in American history was, the turning point of American history. See the different words, they all mean the same thing. This was a huge thing, right? The thing that changed the American position in the world was the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. We took a relatively apart nation, and that event will turn us into the world leader that we are today. That response. There's 1,000 different ways you can say that, but everything would point to the significance of that moment. You recognize that language. You have those words, the most significant, the most important, the greatest moment. Those kinds of synonyms in terms of phraseology, those are in your head. And then when you see that, you go, pay attention, right? There you go. You come out of your half-asleep moment and you pay attention. And those half-asleep moments occur to everybody. They occur to me. But I've trained my mind now that certain words and phrases are going to bring me back awake. Okay? All right. And so John Quincy Adams gave this speech in an address celebrating the Declaration of Independence delivered to Congress on July 4, 1821. The speech was long, eloquent, intellectually ambitious, offering what amounted to an argument for American history as the, oh, look at the words, the greatest of all carriers of enlightenment and liberty. That's the significance of American history. What's another way to say enlightenment and liberty? Freedom and equality. Oh, very good. All right. So, yeah, now you're learning. That's good. Okay. And so, that had been a great quiz question. Freedom and equality. What are the twin pillars of ideology that I teach in this class? Freedom and equality. That's actually going to be on a test, by the way. Because I want you to be paying attention to those ideas. And then down in the last paragraph here, just before the quote, what has America done for the benefit of mankind? Good question. If you look at the interpretation of a lot of historians today, the answer is nothing. They see America as the great Satan. And I'm not just talking about the leaders of radical Islam. Done nothing for the benefit of mankind. We are defined by our racism and by slavery. How could that benefit mankind? You see. Now that's not the interpretation of McClay. It's not my interpretation, but that's the interpretation in a lot of classes. And so then this quote goes on and it suggests that the United States stands for human rights, but also non-interference in the affairs of others. McClay is going to tell you that there's a contradiction there. Because we do interfere in the affairs of others. Well, it's human behavior, so there are contradictions. How many of you live up perfectly to your own ideology? Excellent. That's right. You don't. So we're all hypocrites, aren't we? I'm talking about our own ideology now, not somebody else's. And we all know, if we're at all self-aware, that we do not live up to our own ideology all the time, let alone absolute perfection, the standard of God. Which is why the Bible says, for all have sinned, for all have fallen short of the glory of God. Okay. Now we turn the page again. And I'm on page 229, right? 229. Good. So the first full paragraph up there, a few reflections on the words being used here. Now Maclay is actually going to stop and define words for you. So you think that just went up in terms of significance? Absolutely. You have to know these definitions. The word imperial, again, it's in italics. And the ism deriving from it ultimately came from the Latin term imperium. Now we're getting really fancy. He's going back to the Latin. When they do that, you know, important. As do the related words empire and emperor. As its Latin derivation implies, imperial describes something that existed and flourished long before the advent of the modern world. Empires, meaning political systems in which one central power, a country or people, exercised sovereign power over another country or people, or several of them, could be found everywhere in the ancient world. The word empire, you've probably been reading it for forever. The Roman Empire, the British Empire, the German Empire, see? The Greek Empire, the Babylonian Empire. One group of people exercising control over other people. That's an empire. And then he's going to compare it to colonialism. How's that different? The British established an empire in many places, but in the 18th century they sent convicts to Australia. So Australia is part of the British Empire, but then it also becomes a colonial part of the empire because they sent people there to colonize it. Okay? You can have a part of the empire in which you send no colonists. You're just controlling the people who live there. See? All right. So Canada, the colonies in the in British North America, right? These are part of the empire. You have to know these terms: colony, imperial. So imperialism, as he says, was as old as human history. The next page. You can see, though, if you have a thorough understanding of the words, you're halfway to an education, aren't you? So you don't want to ignore that. You don't just want to breeze through that and say, well, the words don't matter. Page 230, then. Second paragraph, we read, such paternalism. Oh, I didn't even mark this as one you might want to look up. Paternalism could even have religious dimensions along with its political ones. So let's think clearly. Does religion matter here at George Fox University? Yes, it does. At the University of Oregon, very likely you'd have a professor that could not care less about religion. You would you'd go through that paragraph and you say, I know this doesn't matter because my professor doesn't give a whit about religion. Okay, fair. That's thinking, and probably accurately. That's what I want you to do. You are not at the University of Oregon. All the professors here care about religion. See? So anything in any text at any time that is about religion, you wake yourself up and you're paying attention. Okay? It could be a positive, it could be a negative. Not everything about religion is a positive. Christians are people too. They're what? They're imperfect. Yeah, they're imperfect. That means they don't always live up to their own ideology. They make mistakes. All right, so we're paying attention in this paragraph because it's about Christianity. And then there's a guy in here named Josiah Strong. He's a proponent of the social gospel, which is an influential strain of reformist Protestantism that emphasized the achievement of social justice through the active transformation of the world. Make the world a better place. Okay. Strong was particularly influential in pressing the view that the Anglo-Saxon peoples, where are those people from? Anglo-Saxons. Some are, the Saxons. But where did they become the Anglo-Saxons? Great Britain, England, okay? And then the greatest empire in the history of mankind was the British Empire in the 19th century. Good to know. Okay, so these people are taking their Anglo-Saxon interpretation to the rest of the world. All right. He was particularly strong in pressing the view that the Anglo-Saxon people's superior character meant that they were divinely commissioned to Christianize and civilize the world, to engage in the world. Okay. It should be added that Strong's understanding of race seemed to be more about culture than about biology, and he used the term Anglo-Saxon broadly to refer to all the English-speaking peoples of the world. It should also be added that he believed fervently that all races could be uplifted. Not all racists believe that. I mean, after all, why is he bothering if these people are forever condemned to be inferiors, right? He doesn't believe that. That Christianity and the Anglo-Saxon culture can lift them up. See? All right. But that's a reason for engagement in the world. And what Maclay is telling us here is that this is one of the reasons why the British, but later also the Americans, are interested in imperialism. There's a religious aspect to it. Okay. Key phrases. Next paragraph. These ideas may have made imperial expansion more acceptable to the general public. Oh yes, we've got a reason to go out there to help these people to raise their civilization. That would be palatable as opposed to the reason, well, we need to sell more products, we need to make more profit. Another reason, but maybe not as humanitarian as the other. So therefore, it's not as palatable as the concern for humankind. See? Well, we're going to become a world power for some reason, aren't we? Which is it? What's going on here? Because that's the title of the chapter. Why are we doing this? Well, we're moving on. Same paragraph there, the last one. First and foremost amongst these, thinking about foreign policy, look at the language. First and foremost. Might as well have said the greatest. Might as well have said the most significant. Might as well have said here, college students pay attention. See? The first and foremost thinker of this expansionist ideology of ending relative apartness, of becoming a power, is Alfred Thayer Mahan. A naval officer and strategic thinker whose 1890 geopolitical classic, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, blah, 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 blah. And what Mahan is saying is very much part of social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. Yeah. You're either becoming an empire or you're becoming what? A colony. Survival of the fittest, Herbert Spencer, out of Darwin. It's a dog-eat-dog world. And you're either going to be the big dog or you're going to be colonized and lose your freedoms. What do you want? And the way to do this, the way to avoid being eaten is the large navy to protect you. Whoa. And then there are others who agree with Mahan here and take it into the political realm. Mahan just wrote books. So you got Albert Beveridge, you got Henry Cabot Lodge, Apostles of Empire, you see. Well, next page, second paragraph. Down at right in the middle of the page, but it is no exaggeration to say that public opinion was inflamed. If you don't know what public opinion was, that's just the opinion of the American people, public opinion. Okay? We have public opinion polls all the time now. We're taking them every day in Iowa to find out who the Democratic candidate is who is ahead. I think the last check was Bernie Sanders. Right? Public opinion in Iowa. Bernie Sanders. All right, public opinion was inflamed, and that humanitarian concern with apply to the Cubans was the source of that inflammation. So why are the American people angry? It's because of whatever's going on in Cuba. Got the American people angry about something in terms of a foreign country, you have the potential of what? Even if you don't know anything about American history, though, you see that, you can say, uh-oh, we got the American people mad about a foreign country. We got a potential of war, right? And now you say, all right, good, I know this, because I know what I'm looking for, right? What am I looking for? The causes of the war and the effects or the results of the war. In other words, origins of the war, the causes of the war, results of the war, the consequences of the war, and all the synonyms that would suggest the same thing. Because doggone those professors, you know what they think? They think that you're not supposed to use the same word over and over again. Been taught that in your writing classes? Change the word because you just used it in the previous sentence, didn't you? Everybody hear that? Okay, there you go. So you got to know more than one word. You got to be paying attention in order to read well, but also in order to write well. And every single one of you is here to improve those skills. You want to read better, you want to write better, and you want to speak better. See? Because those three talents right there is what can separate you from the person you're competing against in whatever job you have. Because there's not a single one of you here who is in college because the job you're going to go do doesn't require those things. My father-in-law worked or operated a huge backhoe called a dragline in a coal field for 30 years. He didn't need any of that. He didn't need the college education. He didn't need to speak better, write better, or read better. Not one. That coal field is now covered in grass. And coal is very unpopular, even though we've got tons of it. Megatons of it. What I'm trying to say is that job no longer exists, or it won't for very long. See? So, as great as that job was for him and his family, and it was a good job, and he was glad to have it. Child of the Depression, right? You bet. That's not the world you live in. Read better, write better, speak better. And then when you're in that job, you'll be better, most likely, than the person you're competing against for the promotion. Or the person you're competing against just to get the job. Your technical ability in whatever thing that you're trying to do may be the equal, maybe not even quite as impressive as that person you're working against for the promotion, but you present yourself so much better. You're a leader. See? You can communicate. Most of you are freshmen. Work towards that now. Get a jump on it. So we got humanitarian concerns here over the Cubans by the American people, and we're thinking this might lead to war. You got Republican McKinley there in the middle of the page. Don't know if McKinley is a significant guy or not. One way to find out, and this I think will help everybody in the class, you want to know whether this new person that you're reading about is important or not, and the author doesn't really tell you. Just Republican McKinley. Okay, right, there's lots of Republicans. Go to the index. Look up McKinley. How many page numbers are there after his name? 1? You're already on it. Probably not so significant. 12? What does that tell you? You're going to be reading about McKinley for quite a long time, aren't you? Yeah? Significant, right there. It took you all of 30 seconds to figure out whether the guy was important or not. There's always exceptions in life, so what if there was only one reference to McKinley But the author said at that reference, and the most important figure in the coming of the war was Republican President William McKinley. What is your language telling you there? That he is important in spite of only one reference. But 99% of the time, it's how many times they're referred to. How many pages do they take up? The same thing can be done with a topic. Okay? You're not sure whether this is an important topic or not. Go to the index. Then we get down at the bottom of the page of 232. Then at 9:40 p.m. on the night of February 15th, 1898, they're giving you an exact date. That's a clue. Not a clue as to a test question, because I'm not going to ask you exact dates, but if they're giving you an exact date, it's probably a significant event. Without any warning, the Maine suddenly erupted with a massive explosion, which sent her to the bottom of Havana Harbor with a loss of 260 men dead, 2/3 of her crew, and many of the survivors badly injured. The Maine was a U.S. battleship. She's at the bottom of Havana Harbor. You will open a battleship. In case you don't know it, the chances of going to war are 99.9%. So you got a war on your hands. It's just a matter of declaring it. But why? Well, it blew up the Maine for one thing. Okay. We're looking for causes now, though. Okay? Next page, 233, second paragraph. In any event, McKinley now faced the heat of an inflamed American public opinion that wanted what? Vengeance. They killed our men. They sank our battleship. Who did it? They're going to pay. Theodore Roosevelt. Okay. Don't know anything about Theodore Roosevelt. What are you going to do? Index. You're going to find there are several page references to good old Teddy, because he's going to be president of the United States pretty soon. Okay? He called the sinking an act of dirty treachery on the part of the Spaniards. This is the Spanish-American War. Okay. We're going down here to the end of the paragraph where it talks about public passions. He would very likely have no choice but to get out in front of the public passions or risk being bulldozed by them. He's talking about McKinley now. The president does not want war. But who's pushing him to war? People. Yeah, the people. Not to mention the Democratic Party. They are more pro-war in this particular moment than the Republicans were. Okay. And then there's this great line in here that goes almost unnoticed, but it was too late. By then, the Cubans would settle for nothing less than full independence. So what we have here, and I haven't bothered to explain this very, very thoroughly, but Maclay does. Cuba is a Spanish colony. It's a what? Empire. The Cubans want to be free, just like who? The Americans, just to the north. Okay? And the American people are concerned about who? Why are they angry? Because of the way the Spaniards are treating the Cubans. You see? That's why our public opinion is inflamed. We have a humanitarian concern for the people of Cuba. And here's this evil empire, okay, that is oppressing the people of Cuba. We put our battleship down there in Havana to protect American interests and so forth, and then the Spaniards blew it up. Now, that's not what happened. But as far as the American people are concerned, that's what happened. Okay? So now we're going to go to causes of the war. American concern, American people's concern for the people of Cuba and the fact that the battleship Maine got blown up. Okay? Now what are we looking for? Results of the war. Okay? Some wars are so huge and so significant that we're going to look at the conduct of the war, the actual battles, the actual fighting. But in this case, it only lasted 3 months. See? So not so much. The other thing we look for in warfare is who are the heroes or the villains. And oftentimes the heroes in American politics, except for the last 70 years, will become president of the United States. Okay? So a war hero status can lead to the presidency. All right. So, the Cubans are not going to give in no matter what the United States does. See? So there's going to be a war in Cuba between Cuba and the Spaniards, a war for independence, no matter what we do. If you read other interpretations of this war, you will not read that. This is true, though. What you will read is, perhaps, the Americans went to war over Cuba so they could control the Cuban markets. That's economic reasons. Okay? It's all about America. And usually it's all about America being evil. But no, there's going to be a war in Cuba because the Cubans want it. And the only question the American people have is whether they're going to help the Cubans or not. You see? That puts a whole different light on American foreign policy. We launched the war against Spain over Cuba for markets. That makes us greedy what? Imperialists. Or we went to war with Spain over Cuba to help the Cuban people get independence. That is a different war, folks. A different interpretation of who the Americans are or were. And maybe with a different result here in modern America for how you value your country. See, we are fighting today over the American past, the interpretation of the American past. Who were we? Were we the evil empire that nobody should really value and nobody will cry for if it goes away? Or was there always something valuable about America? Not only valuable, but essentially good about America. And we can't afford to lose it today. In American classrooms, we are fighting over this right now. The future of the country hanging in the balance. American capitalism is evil. We have to do away with it. American capitalism has led to the greatest standard of living in the history of mankind. We have to save it. That's one side of the political equation, and then the other one. Your generation is going to decide. So, for Maclay, the war is pushed on a reluctant President McKinley by the American people who are concerned about Cuba. That's the long-term cause of the war, and then the battleship Maine gets sunk. That's the trigger of the war. That's why the war comes when it does. Now, I got the causes. I think I understand it, at least in terms of Maclay, so I'm looking for the results. Next page. So that's all I'm looking for now, is heroes and results. The war itself was brief and one-sided, as disastrous for Spain as can be imagined. John Hay, who had once been Lincoln's personal secretary when he was a young man, and would serve McKinley as a distinguished Secretary of State, called it a splendid little war, a description whose aptness perhaps depends on one's point of view. But of the little there can be no doubt, because it only lasted 114 days. I still haven't found it. It marked the end of Spain's empire. Sound like a result? Good. Okay. And the beginning of an American one. There you go. The primary result of the Spanish-American War is the beginning of an American empire. The latter of these two turned out to be far more complicated matter than it appeared going in. All right. So the rest of this page is about the conduct of the war, how the fighting transpired, how we won, okay? Not so important. Causes and results. Well, it doesn't take very long, this war, so it doesn't take very much space in the textbook. So we get down to that second to last paragraph. Soon there followed an armistice, definition, treaty, okay? Specifying that Spain was to give up Cuba. Okay, Spain lost, so they got to give up Cuba. And that the United States should annex Puerto Rico and Guam. You wanted to know how Puerto Rico became an American possession? One of the results of the Spanish-American War. How about Guam out there in the Pacific? One of the results of the Spanish-American War. What does this sound like? Yeah, it's imperialism and it's an empire. Okay. And occupy Manila until the fate of the Philippines could be decided at a formal peace conference in Paris. The Philippines are going to become an American colony. So here is the creation of an American empire. Guam, Puerto Rico, the Philippines. Significantly, what did I not list there? Cuba. Yeah, Cuba. Doesn't become an American possession. Because the American people did not fight for Cuba to make it a colony. They wanted Cuba to be independent, you see? And so because Cuba is so close to the United States, we're going to have some kind of a protectorate over it. But that's not going to stop Cuba from going communist in the late 1950s. Okay? And being a thorn in our side ever since. All right, more results, last paragraph. And so it was all over, just like that. It had indeed been splendid if you weren't Spanish, and it had been short. It had produced a wave of American patriotic feeling that furthered reconciliation and healing between North and South in America. Civil War is a living memory for many Americans, etc., etc. And the results seemed utterly decisive. The United States was now elevated to the ranks of the certifiable world powers. So now you know something. When did the United States become an empire, a world power? Why? As a result of the Spanish-American War. We're on the course towards empire now. And by the way, now we have a colony out in the far western Pacific, the Philippines, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. The Philippines are on the doorstep of what rising imperial nation? Japan. Page 238, last page. Down in the second to last paragraph here it says, but in fall 1898, McKinley proposed the creation of an open door policy that would open the Chinese market to all trading nations, while recognizing the territorial integrity of China. So I'm reading along, and unless I'm really, really well educated in high school, that phrase open door is just going to go right in one eye and out the other ear. But if I am really well educated, I'm going to, open door. I remember that. It's a big deal. But let's imagine that you don't recognize it as a big deal. Secretary of State John Hay worked tirelessly to advance the policy, and while it was never formally agreed to by the other powers, Britain, France, etc. Here you go. It became the basis of American policy in China for the next half century. Is China important? It's huge. The basis of American policy in China for the next half century. Now I know I have to know what the open door was. The United States was standing for the territorial integrity of China. What does that mean? I might have to look it up. Or you could just Google open door and get a better explanation. Okay? We stand for the territorial integrity of China, meaning China remains China. China is governed by the Chinese, territorial integrity. As opposed to what happened in Africa at this same time, late 19th century. What happens to Africa in terms of the imperial powers? France, Belgium, Great Britain, Germany. They carved that continent up. You've got British South Africa, you've got British Egypt, you've got German Africa, you've got the Belgians in Africa as well, and the Congo and so forth, and you've got French North Africa. Africa's carved up. Now it's China's turn. The imperial powers want to do the same thing to China. What does the United States do? No, we stand for the territorial integrity of China. And the open door, that is, you empires, you can trade with China, but everybody trades with China. That's the open door. Empires only allow their colonies to trade with the mother country. That's a closed door. Egypt can only trade with Great Britain. It's a closed door. It's part of the empire. Okay? The United States is saying in the open door policy regarding China, China is China, not going to get carved up, and everybody can trade. What does that sound like? Sounds like the modern world, doesn't it? In 1900, the United States is standing for its vision of what the world should look like. Free trade. Okay? But we are involving ourselves where? In China, aren't we? We now have the Philippines. Kind of a contradiction to the philosophy behind the open door, isn't it? Yeah, sure. Complicated stuff. Okay. Any questions? Yes. Wrong or right, you can answer that for yourself, okay? The reason that Americans sent the Maine to Havana Harbor was because you have American business people there, okay? And you have the American concern for Spanish behavior, all right? So the battleship there says that we care about the Cubans. We care about our business concerns. It says to the Spanish, behave yourselves. But it also becomes a target. The Cubans might actually be motivated to blow up the Maine in order to cause a war between Spain and the United States. See that? Okay? So, good or bad, you have to answer that for yourself. So they haven't lost Cuba yet. And Monroe Doctrine says that once you're kicked out as a European colonial power, it is the Monroe Doctrine, you can't come back. But they haven't been kicked out yet. Yeah, good question, though. Anybody else? All right, God bless you, and I'll see you next time.